Hey everybody, here we are, Chapter 14, Lesson 1, and what we're looking at here, of course, is we're going to go back into our time machine, and what we want to do is remember that we had just talked about kind of the period where Harry Truman takes office after FDR kicks the bucket and goes all the way through President Eisenhower's time in office, which takes us all the way up to like 1960. And what we want to do is get back into our time machine after doing all that Cold War foreign policy stuff and come back to 1945, and we want to do the same stuff again, but we want to look at what was going on here at home a little bit more without all the crazy Cold War influences that we had talked about in the last chapter. So to do that, we want to take a look at how prosperity economically in the 1950s changes the way we live. And we're going to do that in a couple different ways. So let's kind of get started by looking at the fears Americans have as we were returning kind of to a post-World War II economy, right? Because that's really what was happening here. And people have all kinds of concerns, and they should. Like, will factory production be the same? Could we have a recession where production goes down because people don't need war products? Will unemployment go up? Will the cost of living go up? Will workers get less pay? Like, what's going to happen? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so consumers and Americans don't really need to have all of that fear because, in fact, people, after being through the Depression for 10 years and going through World War II rationing, were tired of not having stuff. And so when World War II comes to an end, people are like, oh my gosh, I really get to buy stuff again. So consumer spending will increase after World War II and keep factory production going, which is awesome. And we're going to see unemployment stay down because the GI Bill is going to give money to veterans to attend businesses or attend college and start businesses and get jobs and learn how to do new things. So really the economy is going to go really, really well. There are some problems, though. I don't want you to think that like everything is just awesome in America after World War II because there were trouble, right? Because the more and more people want stuff, the higher the demand. And the higher the demand of a product, well, the higher the price that product can be, right? And what do we call that, right? When prices rise, right? When prices rise unexpectedly, we call that inflation. And so what we see are workers upset about inflation because their wages aren't going up fast enough. Prices are going up, wages not so. So we're going to see workers go on strike in a whole bunch of different industries because they want to get better pay to make do with all of these difficult prices. You can see here's a strike, for example, of steel workers going on strike because they want higher pay to handle that increased inflation in prices. And President Truman, for example, is going to be like, okay, seriously, like you guys are going to strike right now, right? Like in the late 1940s, you're going to strike. In the early 1950s, you're going to strike. Really? You're going to do this like between 1946 and 1948, like when we're right here going into the Cold War, when we're like right here about to enter Korea, you're going to go on strike. President Truman actually says that you know what, we're gonna actually take over your minds. We're gonna seize your minds. We're gonna take the mines because you can't stop working. Why? Because our army and our military depends on that steel. So you can't just like shut off all the steel and be like, sorry, military, you don't get any. We need to have all that steel. At the same time, Truman does that. He's going to say to the mine owners, like, look, guys, listen, all these people who work in your mines, who work in your factories, they deserve better pay, right? There's rising prices. Their dollar can buy less. They deserve better pay. Americans looked at Truman, who was a Democrat, and they say, you know what, I don't think you're really able to solve this, Truman. I don't think you're doing a very good job. And they end up turning to Republicans instead of Democrats for the first time since 1932. And when the Republicans get into office, they say, well, you know what the real problem here is? The real problem isn't the inflation. The real problem isn't that workers need to get more pay. The real problem is that we have unions that are too powerful who think they can go on strike whenever they want. So they pass a law. It's called the Taft-Hartley Act. And that says unions cannot require someone hire only people already a union member. Those are called closed shops. I'll circle them here. Closed shops. You cannot hire people that are already union members. No more closed shops. Can't do it. Can't do it. And we're going to allow states to have right-to-work laws, and that's going to outlaw union shops. And these require any new employee to join a union, right? So if you're trying to make sense of that, like if you're trying to figure out kind of what that looks like and how that works, here we have a business, B, and we have a whole bunch of workers. And what we're going to do here is take a look at the closed shop first, right? And in the closed shop, you can only hire workers for your business that already belong to the union. You can't hire anyone else. So these guys, tough luck. They don't get hired. That's a closed shop, right? So what about a union shop? Well, a union shop is a little bit different. A union shop is where you can hire whoever you want, right? So here's my business, and here are my employees again, right? And I can hire whoever I want. But once they get in my business, then they have to join the union or they get fired. And so that's a union shop. And the Taft-Hartley Act makes both of these illegal. Can't do it. All right, so let's see what else we have going on. So what we have here then, as we take a look at President Truman trying to get things done between 1945 to 49, he's got to deal with a Republican Congress that doesn't want to let him do things like get higher pay for workers. So Truman is really going to have to fight this. And to do it, he's going to make a couple of, key changes. So let's take a look at what he's going to do. Here are his goals, and I'm going to highlight his goals for you in green. He wants to expand Social Security, raise minimum wage, public housing for the poor, destroy slums, national health insurance. And at the same time, he wants to help people who aren't just white. He wants a civil rights bill that's going to outlaw poll taxes, protect African Americans' right to vote, and make lynching a federal crime. Like, these are big, 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 big deals. The problem is all of these things help black people. And in order for black people to get those things, white Southern Democrats in the 1940s have to approve it. That's not going to happen. Racism's still at play. So what you're going to see are conservatives and white Southern Democrats say, sorry, Truman, you can't do any of those things. Truman might lose the presidential election of 1948. I mean, because you have white Southern Democrats who are angry at Truman, right, because he wants to do things to help African Americans. In fact, it's some Democrats look at Truman's support of civil rights, and they actually abandon the Democratic Party, and they formed the States' Rights Party. They formed their own political party called the Dixiecrats, and they actually run their own presidential candidate, like this guy, Strom Thurmond, a Southern man on a Southern platform. That's a nice way of saying a racist dude for a racist platform, right? A vote for Thurmond's a vote for democracy at home. A vote for Thurmond is a vote for white people keeping black people out of the decision-making, right? And here you can even see Dixiecrats at their convention where they nominated Strom Thurmond. And look, what do we have here? We got Robert E. Lee and Confederate battle flags, right? Because, no, I mean, those people certainly weren't racist slaveholders at all in the past, right? So Truman lost white Southern Democrats. Progressive Democrats are angry at Truman because he can't get anything done. He doesn't get any of his ideas through Congress. Republicans are super popular. And Truman's like, you know what, dude? I'm not putting up with this. He travels 200,000 miles by train and makes 200 speeches in a month and 30 days. That's insane. And he says the Republicans are do nothing. He says, up here, all these things I wanted to do, Congress did nothing. That's not necessarily true, mind you. Congress did do stuff. It did establish the Joint Chiefs of Staff to advise the president on the military, create the Air Force, CIA, the Marshall Plan, 22nd Amendment. They do a bunch of stuff, but the problem is those are all things that help other people, and they don't help Americans directly at home. That's really, really hard for Americans to accept. And Truman actually wins. That message reaches Americans, and he wins. A very close battle. And when he gets into office, he names his plan the Fair Deal. He gives a speech right there in 1949. That's the State of the Union speech. And in that speech, he says that every American should have a fair deal. President Truman says that that fair deal should include, and the reason why we have to have a fair deal is that in 1949, we still have many Americans living in poverty with no health care. We have workers and farmers that are getting left behind because their wage is so low. Education across the country is really inadequate, and we have too much prejudice, racism in our government. So President Truman says the fair deal is a solution to these problems. He says, let's raise the minimum wage. He gets that done. He says, let's expand Social Security finally. He gets that done. He wants to have national health insurance, and he wants farmers to have aid as well as schools. And those, he does not get through Congress. The one reform that makes the most impact directly, that's the minimum wage. That definitely helps people, but the other stuff he's not able to get done between 1949 and 1953. So what we have here then is a Truman that is able to get stuff done, but just not enough stuff because white Southerners and Republicans don't want him to get those things done. And so what happens next? The easy answer for what happens next is Truman doesn't run. When 1953 comes around, Truman's like, you know what, forget you guys. I don't want to run for president again, right? The Korean War is going on. The war's in a stalemate. The Red Scare is scaring Americans. We've got Republicans and conservative Democrats not letting him get anything through Congress. He says, forget you guys, I'm out. Democrats run this guy named Adlai Stevenson. He's not that popular. Republicans run a super popular guy named Dwight Eisenhower, World War II hero, did well in Korea. He wins in a landslide, right? And so now we have a Republican president for the first time since 1932 as well. So what does that look like, right? What does Eisenhower, the Republican, do now that we actually have a Republican in office for the first time? And he's kind of like Teddy Roosevelt. I think that's the easiest way to think of Eisenhower because he believes in common sense programs, right? So he wants to balance laissez-faire economics, letting the companies do what they want to do with government regulation and what's good for people. So he says that what we have to do is end government support for businesses that don't need it. He calls this idea creeping socialism, this idea that if the government keeps giving more and more money to business, at some point the government's going to be controlling the business, and that's socialism. He says we can't do that. If your business doesn't need help, you're not going to get help. He does the same thing when it comes to schools. He says, listen, that's not our business. We need to not be providing schools for people. The states can do that. He says public housing, not our business. The states can do that. He does do other things, though, that are kind of common sense and help all Americans and business, like Federal Highway Act. He is responsible for all those interstates that we drive on all over the country, I-83, I-95, I-81, all those kinds of different highways. That's Eisenhower. There's a map of them right there, right? And that helps everybody. It helps us. It helps business. He even does... in this project, a gigantic seaway, a canalway to move business and merchandise from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, cheaper than ever before. So, you take a look at this, and the $25 billion 10-year project to build all these things, the Federal Highway Act of 1956, it's the largest public works program ever in American history, and it's a perfect example of how we have common sense politics helping everyone. Social Security is expanded, unemployment benefits are increased. These are all things that help people. Minimum wage goes up, some federal aid to farmers, right? This common sense approach says, you know what, let's give Eisenhower a second term. So he's going to be reelected and serve again from 1957 to 61. And really, I think that's a good place to stop because it gives us a good feel for the kind of the tension with Truman after World War II and how America really embraced Eisenhower after the Truman years.